Hello everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith. Today, I'm excited because I'm actually talking about a video that I didn't put out. I actually recently stumbled across a video from a really good friend of mine, Rob from Rob's Tabletop World. He put out a video that was solo specific, so as soon as I saw the title, I was instantly intrigued and I watched the thing from start to finish to get his idea on this video. I'll let you know the title in 2 seconds, but I also want to let you know that video will be in the video description and pinned comments. You can go check it out to get an idea as to like where my comments are coming from and how this even came to be in terms of a video for myself here on the channel. So he had titled his, "Do you feel ripped off when a game says it has a solo option and it really doesn't?" Now let's talk about this from a couple different angles here. The first one's retail, and on the retail side, if a game's gone to retail and it's been labeled as a one-player game, so the actual player count has changed, it's 1 to 5, let's say, instead of 2 to 5 or whatever. Usually if something's gone to retail, at that point there's enough coverage on that game as it's going to retail that people will know how much of a solo aspect's been developed around it, because by then enough information's kind of been leaked about it. And if it's going to retail, there's just more information to get and find essentially for that game. But for crowdfunding, which is the opposite side of the coin, it gets a little bit more mixed and weird because, solo play can be added into a crowdfunding campaign from the get-go, from the ground up, from when the developers literally started building the game. They could have had an AI in there that helped them to actually design the game originally before it became a multiplayer game. They already had that solo aspect built in, and I actually think that's the best way to do it in most cases if you want to almost guarantee that your solo mode is going to be thoroughly rooted in the core building or the core design of the game from the ground up. But there's other ones out there that have proven that you can add solo play maybe mid-design or think about it a little bit later. But it starts to get riskier and riskier the further along in the development cycle you go, where you start to begin to get into this road of tacking a solo play element onto the game and then basically changing the player count on the box in a crowdfunding campaign when you launch it, or maybe even after you launch it, and it's even worse in my opinion. But like essentially going into a crowdfunding campaign, having a very slim solo mode, or maybe a future promised one, or even worse, a stretch goal associated solo mode, which I cannot tell you how much I don't like that. I'm sure there's a lot of solo gamers that would also agree with me on that count. But the reason I kind of wanted to mention that and just kind of put those two options out there, those are the two probably major sides of the coin, I guess, for this aspect that Rob was talking about. And the one thing that I think gets missed, and I think this is probably what leads, I believe, and this is again just my own personal take, I believe that there's a lot of game designers out there that design a game and they might have a game in their back pocket. They've started with a 2 to 4 player game, let's say. They get partway through the design, or they get into the back half of design and they go, wouldn't it be cool to kind of add some kind of solo element into this thing? We don't have that. And if we did that, we'd be bringing in a whole other community of people that wouldn't otherwise be interested maybe in our product as much. So by doing so, as soon as you go ahead and flip that and put that 1 on the box, put that 1 mention in terms of a player count on the campaign page, you are instantly going to get more eyes from the community, the solo community, directly trying to figure out what's going on with that solo option. And to me, this is where things get really, really important. And there's risks. You can take risks in this kind of situation as a designer, as a publisher, pushing your campaign out the door as a creator. You can definitely take risks in terms of trying to tack things on at the very, very end, which, again, I consider a risk being putting a solo mode inside of a stretch goal. To me, that's a risk because solo players are quite savvy, and when they see a solo play mode that is not fully flushed out, not fully, the information around that solo mode is not being given out during the campaign, and then they see it as a stretch goal, they kind of sit there and go, well, this is a risk. It could be good, it might be good, but it might not be. Now, the risk that you have as a person who's pushing that out the door as part of your campaign is if you actually hit it out of the park and are able to make that work, and the consumers that bought into your crowdfunding campaign are happy, well, then you just made a whole bunch of happy consumers that are going to come back to you later on. But the risk side of it is that if you fail at that, you probably lose those individuals for future projects. Those individuals were already risking their money, knowing that it wasn't going to be a fully fledged solo development. It was just going to be kind of a half-baked thing they're adding in, but it seemed interesting enough, maybe based on the IP or the title or the gameplay or whatever they saw, that they were willing to try it. But if it fails for them when it lands on their doorstep, they may not come back to you again in the future. And that's, I think, the harsh note that gets missed, more so around Kickstarter, where individuals that put up products or put up projects sometimes kind of overlook that or think that it's worth the risk to go down that road. And I'm kind of wanted to mention, just from my perspective, that I really don't think it is. Now I want to talk a little bit about the mentality of solo gamers. Some of this is honestly common sense and seems pretty straightforward, but I do think there is some confusion in terms of maybe how the solo community actually chooses, based on a priority system, let's say, in their minds, as to why they would back a game that has any type of mention of a solo mode. So as soon as they see that one player label, like Rob was alluding to in his video, they instantly become intrigued by it because, hey, I can play it solo. But that's when the digging begins. That's when the individual sits down and says, all right, great, it has a solo mode. That's like a very small portion of the battle. Now we're going to try to figure out, well, like, if I go in on this Kickstarter campaign, GameFound campaign, whatever crowdfunding platform it is, if I'm going to go after the base game, let's say, and forgetting any extras and add-ons and everything else, the base game, needs to have, based on its dollar value, a solo implemented that is worth the base game cost that I'm going to go ahead and put my money into. And I think that's where Rob nailed it out of the park. I'm not going to go into specifics around individuals that are kind of adding solo into their gameplay, but it's such a small, it's almost like a teaser or a taste, or like, hey, we could have done this fully fledged, but this is just going to be a snippet of what you could have had, but it's nowhere near what you should have had. And he nailed it in terms of that being a frustration point where someone could come in and be like, yeah, I'm going to give you my $80 to buy that game. And then they get it and they're like, I can only play this one scenario solo. Like, really? And there's 10 scenarios in the box. Like, that really kind of caps me. It handcuffs me for my enjoyment level of the game because I was coming at this from the angle of being able to play it primarily solo. So putting all that aside, because I think Rob nailed that out of the park, I want to talk about the aspect that I think gets missed in terms of the understanding of maybe the industry even as well in board gaming around how a solo gamer thinks about actually purchasing a game off a crowdfunding site. Now, this is going to be different for everybody. So, I'm going to give you my take. It's probably not going to land for absolutely everybody, but I imagine it hopefully will be a good enough generalization that it will apply across the board. So essentially, when I come to a Kickstarter page, if I see that it's labeled as a one-player game, I'm intrigued. As I mentioned before, I'll look at it, I'll read through it, I want to know more about it. So what are the things that I'm actually looking for? Well, if I'm a solo gamer, there's always been two mentalities, I think, in the industry in terms of what a solo gamer means to somebody who's about to release a project. They either look at solo gamers as people that primarily play multiplayer, but appreciate the insurance policy that a solo option in a game gives to a potential purchase. In other words, multiplayer first, solos are nice to have as a backup because it ensures that my purchase, even though it's for a multiplayer game that I do play, because there's a lot of people out there that are solo gamers, quote unquote, that still play games multiplayer. So there is that side of the coin you have to take into account. And I was probably in that camp before I started content on the channel, but things changed for me. It changed, and I'll get to that in a second. But basically, it started as multiplayer first because I was thinking, hey, I want to play games with friends. I want to whatever, that kind of thing. And then if it has a solo mode, that's a bonus because now if I'm putting my money on the table, then I have the option that I can play this thing solo. It's an insurance policy that if nobody can get together and things don't click, my group doesn't like it. If I like it, because I already checked out the campaign page and I'm the one that put the money out there, I know I can table this thing and actually enjoy it. And that's I think the industry was looking at the solo gaming for quite a while like that. It was like, it wasn't at the forefront, it was in the back seat. It was, yeah, sure, we'll chuck it in there. It kind of just adds another, alternative to how you play this game and enjoy it, but it's not the primary reason people want to go and enjoy a game. Well, I think that the train has left the station on that mindset, I want to say. And I feel like these days, if the individuals that are creating new crowdfunding campaigns don't understand that solo gamers are at this point in time savvy enough to look at a campaign and sit there and go, okay, I'm a solo gamer, and let's say hypothetically this solo gamer is not just only a solo gamer. Because if you're talking about solo gamers, they're just only solo gamers, they play no multiplayer games whatsoever and wouldn't even entertain it, well then that's a pretty cut and dry case. So we'll just move those aside. But what if you're an individual who still plays multiplayer games with your friends? Like, I still do. I have a solo focused channel. I play solo games by myself primarily. That's my primary way of purchasing decisions, content that I create, what I love the most. If I had to choose, I had to drop multiplayer or solo, multiplayer would go out the door in a heartbeat. Because I find, for me personally, multiplayer is very situational. You have to get the right people at the table. You have to have the right friends that like the same thing that you're willing to play. You have to also time it right, schedule it right, and how often you can make that happen routinely, difficult. It can happen, and it does happen. I have had routine weekly gameplay sessions with friends and things like that, but as fast as they start, they stop. As quick as they begin, they change to a different game. Like, there's a lot of barriers to getting to that quote-unquote perfect game group that every purchase as a person off of a crowdfunding site, every game that you get in is going to get played. Like, good luck trying to get all your multiplayer games played. It's just not going to happen, especially if you're buying them at a rate that most people do this day when they're really into the hobby. So I think what's really interesting with this conversation is the fact that solo gamers come at this from a completely different angle. And as I mentioned, it started for me as multiplayer mainly and switched to solo as my main driver. So when I go to a campaign page, as I alluded to minutes ago, maybe more than a few minutes ago now, I'll open it up. If I see one player that intrigues me, then I go to the next step. My next step is now, does it have solo play? And the first thing I'm looking at when I look at that is I go, can I play this game? When I put the money out on the line to actually back this particular campaign, do I guarantee that I'll be able to enjoy this for the dollar value that I am actually putting out there? So there, in my mind, there's kind of three things happening in a row in my brain. Does it have solo play? And of course, that's obvious based on the first condition of there being a one-player mention, as Rob mentioned in his video. Second is, does it have multiplayer? And the reason that that matters for me is because if I'm going to put the money out for the solo play primarily, I still like the idea that I could actually play this thing with a group if I can get said group together to play it. But that's a secondary thing for me. And I think that's where there's a massive difference for people that don't play solo primarily, which is probably the vast majority of the individuals in the hobby that are multiplayer focused all the time. But as a solo community, it's reversed. It's completely reversed. It's solo playing first, and this sounds completely obvious, but I don't think it's actually as obvious as it seems to some individuals that are creating campaigns based on them, like Rob said, slamming solo modes in that are half-baked, tacked on, all this kind of stuff. So if it's one player label, solo is the first thing I'm looking at. The second thing I'm looking at is multiplayer, and the last thing is cost. And the reason cost is last is because I need to know, first off, is a solo play good, worth it? Is there enough there to justify the cost? And then on top of it, I want to know, is the multiplayer that's there intriguing, interesting enough as a backup option, also as part of the decision on the cost? And then, of course, there's many more facets beyond that. Like, do you like the artwork? Do you like, have you looked at the shipping costs? Have you looked at, there's so many different avenues, right? People could put priorities, maybe depending on where you're living in the world. You could look, maybe one of the first things you do if you live in an area of the world that's really tough to get games to, the first thing you do is it solo and can I get it shipped to my location? If neither of those two things apply, I'm out, right? And I understand and respect that too, because not every solo game is available everywhere as commonly as it might be in, say, Canada or the US or UK or something like that. So long story short, it's a different mindset for solo gamers because we look at it from the standpoint of, I guess I want to kind of relate it to the video game industry in a way, but it's really tough. It's really hard to kind of relate those one-to-one because it's kind of a messy situation. But long story short, if I look through my Steam game collection, as much as I love playing multiplayer games in terms of video games, right? And I did in the past more so than I do now, but I still have tons of multiplayer games. Primarily, my Steam library is full of single-player video games with a multiplayer option, or I have a handful of just multiplayer only games. My primary purchases when I'm spending my money to invest in something that I'm going to play is single player first, multiplayer second. And I think this is something that still isn't fully understood, or at least it's again taken as from individuals that put out a campaign and assume a solo community is looking at it from a multiplayer first, and solo play is like, sweet, that kind of guarantees the deal and seals it for me. I'm not going to go ahead and throw my money at it. But for me, it's not. It's literally, I need to be able to know that if I put this money forward, because it's my money coming from me, that I can go ahead and play Descent Legends of the Dark by myself with absolutely nobody from start to finish, with absolutely no constraints. And when you start saying the word multiplayer, barriers pop up all over the place. Timing, scheduling, I've already gone through a whole bunch. You guys can already imagine a whole bunch, and you've already probably experienced a whole bunch. Multiplayer adds all kinds of cons to the table. There's so many. It's not even worth mentioning half of them. But when you're talking with single player experiences, just like if you're talking about video games, you want to play you want to play Elder Scrolls, and you want to sit down and play that game and enjoy it because you purchased it and you enjoy what you purchased, or at least you assume you're going to enjoy what you purchased. Sure, sit down whenever you want. Whenever you got free time, you get to enjoy it. And that's one of the major reasons why I think solo gaming is becoming one of the major reasons and one of the major things people look for when they go to buy a game now, because they're going, back in the day, solo play wasn't as important. It was always multiplayer first with board games. It was always the focus on multiple people around the table, and solo was the afterthought. The shift has already happened. It already occurred. It's been occurring over the past few years. The ball is rolling. Like, it is moving from multiplayer as a first priority to solo play as a first priority, and multiplayer as a nice to have. Because games like Descent, or any kind of game, you could even look at this one here I just got recently, they're fantastic games. I haven't even opened this one, but I've heard so many great things about it. I'm excited to try it, but guess what? Can't play it. It doesn't matter. I mean, COVID or no COVID, I still have to get people to the table to actually be able to play this game, which means they have to like what I'm bringing to the table. I have to teach it to them, and then we have to coordinate to the point where we can get them all in the same room. And then after that, I have to hope they want to come back and play it again. If I bought this for multiplayer only, it's risky. It's risky, but that's all this game offers. Now, and this is a perfect example of an exception, because I know that my gaming group enjoys Blood Rage, and we've also enjoyed Rising Sun. This was an exception to the rule for me, because I looked at it and went, this is a spiritual successor in that line of products. So I could sit there and go, yep, it's worth the risk to me that I might never be able to table this thing, but because I've played previous iterations of the game where I've enjoyed it, there's a chance that I can actually get this thing to the table and in a multiplayer capacity enjoy it. Don't have that issue with Descent. Didn't even bat an eye when the price was as it was, and still is. Because I sat there and said, regardless of any multiplayer issues, and again, this is like, take COVID and throw it out of the equation. If it's not part of the situation, it's still difficult to get people consistently to the table. And even myself, like I mentioned before, I've done gaming groups, weekly ones actually, every single Monday. And it was still, like, with the amount of multiplayer games out there, I could not cover all the games in my collection behind me. So a whole bunch of the games I've got behind me here, maybe half of them or more, have never seen the light of day in a multiplayer capacity. Weird, right? Like, it's strange when you sit there and justify in your mind when you're on Kickstarter, like, I'm going to buy this game because I can't wait to play with my buddies, and it ends up on your shelf, sitting there for a long time before you even get a chance to play the thing. Whereas you buy a game specifically for yourself because it's your money and you're putting it out there. If it's Descent, like I mentioned, who's to stop you? Like tonight, for instance, I have nobody around, no responsibilities for this night. I can go ahead upstairs right now and set Descent up and have a blast playing it. I could also go to a video game console, sit down by myself, have a blast playing it. That money that I put into that game is guaranteed to give me value at any point in time whenever I want it to. Multiplayer games don't have that. They just don't. They don't have it. And the thing is, I've heard arguments that, like, I've got the perfect group and, like, we meet up all the time and stuff like this. That's awesome. And there's going to be exceptions to that rule. But I think on an overall scale, it's not the norm. It's not the norm. It's the ideal. It's the ideal norm. It's the hope. It's the dream. But it's not reality. It's just not. I just wanted to come at this from a solo angle because, long story short, wrapping back to the very beginning of this video, my whole thought process is just to say, don't look at the solo community. If you're somebody who's designing a game to go for a crowdfunding campaign, don't look at the solo community as a group of people that look at solo play as an insurance policy to their multiplayer games. If you're thinking that that's the way to go about things, I think that's the reason why some of these companies tack solo games into stretch goals. They tack them on later. They say, oh, we've got this great multiplayer game, and guess what? Solo's there. We got it. We're writing it right now. We just can't release the rules, and we probably won't until maybe after the campaign. Like, when they start saying that kind of stuff, the red flags start going up, and I go, it's not worth it. It's just not worth the risk, because if I can't table this game and I put that money out there, I'm literally I might as well go to a casino. Like, I might as well go to a casino and roll the dice and hope I hit the jackpot to be able to come home and say, yep, that was worth it. But in most cases, it's not going to be. And I have complete proof as an individual from my side of the equation, at least just personally, my own experiences based on my collection behind me and how many of those games have actually gotten to the table in a multiplayer fashion. I would probably say, and I think I said about half earlier in the video, and that was kind of like a rough guess. I'd probably say it's less than that. I'd probably say it's like 1/4 of the games that have multiplayer components have actually been to the table as a multiplayer game. And I don't think it's because I'm a solo gamer. I have a game, like I said, I had a game group going prior to COVID and it was consistent. We just can't play that many games. It's literally impossible to play that many multiplayer games. But you know what's not impossible? Playing solo games, because there's nothing stopping you from playing the game whenever you want. And that's kind of the thing I'm trying to hammer home. And I guess I've kind of gone in circles a few times, but it's just to say solo gamers used to be in the back seat in terms of being the primary focus of why a game was designed. Like, games were always around designing for multiplayer. I think it's going to change, and I think it's already changing to the point where it's like the game designers need to come to the table at the beginning and be saying, how do we design solo into this from the ground up? Plus, use the solo AI and that automation of the AI that you're building in for solo play as part of your testing as to whether your multiplayer game is any good. You can do this, there's proof of it, and there's benefits on all sides. Not only are you play testing your game in a different fashion now, but you're also adding a whole other community of people that are more interested and more invested and more willing to pull the trigger on actually backing your game if you do a good job from the ground up. That's the approach that should be done now, and that's, I think, what most people have figured out, but not everybody. And I think, to Rob's point in his video where he said he still sees these companies slapping one-player labels on games and all this kind of stuff, it still happens. And you can tell really easily, like I said, solo gamers are savvy. They go, I think, beyond what even just multiplayer specific players focus on. And they really dig in because they really want to know, like, what did you add that actually is going to be interesting here from a solo perspective? If you take a look at the comments on Kickstarters where there's any kind of solo mode talked about, the amount of questions are like, please show us the rule book, please give us more details, please. Like, there's a lot of like, hey, my primary reason for being interested in being here is because I want to know that solo mode is solid. I want to know that my money being put out, I can get value out of this when I buy it. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to throw my thoughts out there because I don't see this being talked about ever. I know that it's something that's being talked about behind the scenes in the game design industry, or not game design industry, but the game design side of the equation. And I know it's being talked about within certain companies within the board game industry for sure. They've already caught wind of that and understand it, and from the ground up are developing games. So great examples, Chip Theory Games. Like, they literally build their games with solo play in mind, knowing that they're not going to disconnect that community from their campaigns and from their games because they know how strong that community is. And they're wise to do that. Like, it's no longer, like I said, I've probably said it too many times now in this video, we are not in the back seat anymore. We are in the front seat. And it's just, half the people don't know that yet. And I think that's kind of the coolest part of the story, is seeing how solo play went from being this like shunned thing of like, oh no, like you play board games solo, like you pull a board game out, you learn that, and then you manage the AI by yourself. Like, why not just do it with a friend? That seems so lame, that's so boring. And I think the majority of us just turn around and say, you sit in front of a console and you turn on a video game and you play that by yourself and you follow a story by your, like, alone? Like, you do that? And I'm like, it's just like, that's the same thing. Like, it's the same thing. Like, That's what playing a game solo is. You are literally moving through a game by yourself, and I think this is where you start having two different camps of solo players. The ones that really want a narrative-driven experience, something that immerses them thematically and things like that, because you get games like Descent that'll pull you in on the narrative, pull you on the surprise element of the game and how it unfolds. But then you have other solo gamers that are, they're kind of tired of that. Maybe they've done a bunch of it and they want to do something that's more like, I want to build an engine. I want to build something that's more of a Euro style game where I have nothing and I build up to the point of just beating the AI from points alone. There's people that are on that side of the equation too and could care less about the narrative side, narrative-driven side of an adventure game side of solo gaming. And that's perfectly fine too, because you have different tastes across solo gamers for sure, and we're not all the same. So again, a long story short with this video, this covers like so many different facets in and out. I surely didn't button up everything. I probably left some things open, but what I'm trying to say by going through all this is that I saw Rob's video and I saw his mention about the fact of being kind of a little bit upset about the fact that he'd bought games that said they had solo mode, but then ended up being like a tenth of what they should have been when they mentioned solo play is included. And that really does need to stop. And the solo players are going to you might get lucky and some of them might bite the first time. But after they get that game from you and they open up the box and they go, I spent $80 on that and I get one scenario out of 10 that's solo playable, as I said earlier, they're not coming back. They're not coming back for your next project. And you might get some of them to come back if you open up the doors the next project and say, we're doing solo from the beginning because we realized our mistake, blah, blah, blah. But there's not too many times where that happens. Like if you're not on board with that stuff, it just seems to kind of fall by the wayside sometimes. But I have seen some turnarounds. I think actually a really great example, actually, off the top of my head, would be Awaken Realms. Actually, would be a really good example, because I know back when Lord of Hellas dropped, that was a really expensive miniatures game that mentioned there was going to be solo play in it, and there was, but it was, a slice. It was like if I remember correctly, it was a snare. I still have the game myself, but I played it quite a while ago, but it's a slice of the game. If you're playing it solo, you are missing out on like 70 to 80, 90% of the experience. Like you just got a taste. It was almost just like, haha, we got you. And nobody wants to feel that when they open up the box. But the thing that was cool was that Awaken Realms actually learned from that, I believe, because every game they released afterwards, every single one had solo play built in. They figured it out. They realized that the solo community is not a side thing. It's not they're just doing it because there's no other choice, or because these people don't have friends, or because all these generic responses that get tossed around. It's literally because they're savvy. They're looking at their dollar going, I want to buy this game and I want to play it. I don't want it to sit on a shelf waiting for my friends to be free so we can play it later. I want to play it now. So I want to play solo. So that's pretty much all I got to say. So many different angles to that, but I guess Awaken Realms is a really good example, because honestly, like I said, from Lord of Hellas onwards, I don't think they skipped a beat. I think every single game that they released all the way through had solo play in it, and it wasn't tacked on from that point forward. After Lord of Hellas, it was full-fledged. Everything could be played solo, or it had like a full mode or more, maybe 2 modes that could be played in a solo capacity. I think Nemesis has like 2 ways to go about it. You got like a full narrative book side of things, and you also have just kind of the play cooperatively side of things as well. It's like they really upped their game, and there's other companies and publishers out there that really need to understand that and get on board with it. Because it really will change the success of your projects if you start to focus on that as a primary focus, not a secondary or third or even further down the road. But that's it. That's all I got to say. This is kind of a longer ramble than normal, but I just thought it was like, this is so interesting, and I really appreciated Rob throwing that video out. I thought it was a great watch, and I probably didn't I mean, I'm sure during this video as you were watching, I might have kind of circled back and talked, but because some of this stuff kind of overlaps and you talk about one aspect and it kind of, you know, rolls you right back into something a point you just made moments ago. But it, you know, in long story short, I think you guys got the gist of what I was going after. But I think hopefully what's happened here is I've opened up the doors for a discussion, basically, is what I'm trying to do. So I want to hear what you guys think, because I can ramble for way too long. And I'd rather hear what you guys have to say as well, because I'm not saying that this is the way all solo gamers are. There's going to be aspects or pockets of people in this solo gaming community that have a completely different viewpoint on things, right? There's going to be people, as I mentioned, that are still multiplayer first, because maybe they truly enjoy playing their games multiplayer with their friends or their game group, and then solo is a nice backup insurance policy option, and they still consider themselves a solo gamer, and that's totally fine, because you still are. You don't have to play solo only or solo primarily to be a solo gamer. It just means you basically are okay with playing a game by yourself. That's it. Like, it's not complicated. But yeah, so the two questions I want to ask, and I wrote them down because I thought I would butcher this if I tried to remember them. But the first one was, as someone who plays games solo, what's your priority between solo play and multiplayer? So this, again, sounds like a really obvious question, but as I just mentioned, maybe your primary way, even though you are a solo gamer per se, is you still prefer multiplayer over solo. And I want to hear that. It'd actually be interesting to see if that's more the thing than I think it is. You know, maybe I'm wrong that way, but then I think there's gonna be a lot of people that say, well, this question's kind of a wash. If you're a solo gamer, then you primarily like playing solo games, so that question's meh. Or maybe I've kind of set up like a, you know, like a T-ball situation where I basically just set up a home run for solo gamers there. But regardless, I want to know, because I just want to see how on or off I am here. The second question I'm way more interested in, and that is, what three things as a solo gamer do you look for when checking out a game, whether it's on crowdfunding or even just retail? And I mentioned my three. As I told you I would do in these videos, I always want to throw out my thoughts, and then I want to hear your thoughts, because they might not be the same, and that's totally fine. You don't have to have the exact same mindset as me, but the three would be, you know, for me, as I mentioned before, solo play, multiplayer, and then price. Somebody else might look at it, like I said as an example, and be solo play, location for where this game could be possibly shipped to, and then maybe price. Or maybe it's art first, like art's the very first thing, then solo play, and then something else. Or maybe it's price first. Maybe the first thing you look at budget-wise, you go, it comes down to dollars, and it comes down to some of these games are outrageously expensive, and I can't afford every game that comes out, so it's price first, then solo, and then multiplayer. Like, I think this is going to be interesting, and I really would like to hear those three. So let me know in the comments below those two questions. They showed up on screen as I mentioned them, but yeah, let me know, because I think this is going to be kind of cool to hear. And just want to again give a shout out to Rob. I think his channel's awesome. I think you guys should go check out the video he dropped and I mentioned. It's in the linked in the description and pinned comment. But that's going to be it. I'm going to stop now, because if I keep rambling, we are going to go for hours, because I could talk about this stuff forever. But hopefully you enjoyed this. I had a blast just kind of rambling on, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys think. So thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, keep on rolling solo.